They begged humanity for help. They screamed into the void. They sent desperate delegations to Earth's borders. But for the first time in 3 centuries, humanity said nothing. And the galaxy realized that silence from humans was far more terrifying than any weapon they'd ever built. The Galactic Council chamber hung in the void between stars, a structure so massive it created its own gravitational field. Within its crystalline walls, representatives from 743 species gathered in an emergency session. The air thrummed with 1,000 different breathing patterns, and the translation matrix struggled to keep pace with the cacophony of worried voices. Ambassador Zekthera of the Vrin Collective raised all 4 of her sensory stalks, calling for order. As the Council's longest-serving member, her word carried the weight of 6,000 years of galactic history. The chamber fell silent, save for the nervous chittering of the younger species. Honored representatives, her voice resonated through the translation field. We face an unprecedented crisis. 47 standard cycles ago, humanity ceased all communication with the galactic community. Their response to our diplomatic channels has been silence. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. The Krelix delegate, a being of pure energy contained within a magnetic field, pulsed an anxious yellow. Silence? From the humans. This is impossible. They never stop talking. Their communication networks span their entire species. They broadcast everything from scientific discoveries to what they ate for breakfast. Zekthara's primary eyes dimmed with concern. Precisely. Which is why their silence is so terrifying. The Margothian representative, a massive creature whose species had once ruled 3 sectors through military might, let out a low rumble. Perhaps they have finally seen reason and retreated to their system. The humans were always problematic. Problematic? The Sylvari ambassador's melodious voice carried a note of warning. You mean they refused to be conquered? They refused to accept their place in the hierarchy you attempted to impose. The Margothian's scales flushed red, but before he could respond, a holographic display materialized at the center of the chamber. It showed humanity's home system, Sol, surrounded by what appeared to be an impenetrable sphere of unknown construction. This appeared 3 cycles after they stopped responding, Zekthara explained. We've sent probes. We've sent messages. We've sent delegations. Nothing passes through. Nothing comes out. And most disturbing of all, nothing happens. There's no response, no reaction, no acknowledgement of our attempts. A younger delegate from the Phosphorian Consortium raised a tentacle. Forgive my ignorance, honored elder, but why is human silence such a concern? They are but one species among thousands. The chamber erupted in agitated murmurs. Zekthara waited for the noise to settle before responding. Her voice grave. Because, young one, in the 300 standard years since humanity joined the galactic community, they have stopped 4 major wars, revolutionized 17 fields of science, saved 12 species from extinction, and killed a god. The silence that followed was absolute. They killed the devourer of the Kepler Nebula, Zekthara continued. When that entity consumed 6 solar systems and was heading for the galactic core, when we had all accepted our doom and prepared for the end of civilization, humanity said, no. They didn't negotiate. They didn't retreat. They didn't seek compromise. They weaponized a star, collapsed it into a black hole and fed the devourer to it. Then they sealed the black hole with technology we still don't fully understand. She paused, letting this sink in. And when we asked them why they did it, do you know what they said? Because someone had to and we were closest. That is humanity. They don't seek permission. They don't calculate odds. When they decide something must be done, they do it. So when beings like that go silent, when they build walls and refuse to speak, you should be terrified. Because the only thing more dangerous than an angry human is a silent one. Ambassador Zekthara gestured to a side chamber, and a figure emerged, a human, to the shock of many present. Dr. Sarah Chen, the last human to leave the galactic community before the silence fell, walked slowly to the center of the chamber. She was old by human standards, her hair silver, her face lined with years of experience, but her eyes held the sharp intelligence that had made humanity such a formidable presence in galactic affairs. Dr. Chen, Zekthara's voice was gentle. Will you tell them what you told me? About why your people have gone silent. Sarah looked around the chamber, her gaze taking in the hundreds of species represented. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. I'll tell you what I know, but I doubt it will bring you comfort. She took a breath. Humanity has a concept we call the final straw. It's the last small thing that breaks you after carrying an unbearable weight. For 3 centuries, we've been that weight for you, solving your problems, fighting your battles, cleaning up your messes. And we did it gladly, because we thought we were building something together, a true galactic community. She pulled up her own holographic display showing a timeline of events. 70 years ago, the Tyrellian plague threatened to wipe out the Tyrellian species. It was a genetic weapon, tailored specifically to their biology, released by an unknown aggressor. The Tyrellian government came to us begging for help. Our scientists worked for 3 years straight. 16 of them died from exhaustion and exposure to the pathogen, but we created a cure. We saved their species. The Tyrellian delegate shifted uncomfortably. We asked for one thing in return, that they share the cure with us, so we could study it and prepare defenses against similar weapons. They refused, citing intellectual property laws. They patented the cure we developed and sold it back to their own people at inflated prices. Murmurs of discomfort rippled through the chamber. 45 years ago, the consortium of free traders asked for human assistance with a pirate fleet that was devastating their shipping lanes. We sent 3 of our best peacekeeping fleets. The campaign lasted 2 years. We lost 8,000 personnel. When it was over, the consortium awarded the primary trade contracts to Vrin corporations, citing humanity's aggressive military tendencies as a reason to exclude us. Sarah's voice grew harder. 20 years ago, we discovered evidence of a slave trade operating in the outer reaches. Not debt servitude, not contracted labor, actual genuine slavery. Children being taken from primitive worlds and sold to industrial complexes. We brought this evidence to the Council 17 times. 17 times it was deemed insufficient for action, so we acted. We freed those people, and we were sanctioned for violating the sovereignty of the species running the operation. The chamber was silent now, but it was an uncomfortable silence, and then, 52 cycles ago, came the final straw, the Kryn system. The holographic display changed to show a solar system with 3 habitable planets. The Kryn were a pre-spaceflight species, peaceful, artistic. They were developing rapidly and would have reached the stars within a century. The Margothian hegemony decided their planets would make excellent mining colonies. They didn't ask. They didn't negotiate. They sent in pacification fleets. The Margothian delegates' scales turned a sickly gray. The Kryn sent out desperate distress calls, primitive radio signals, begging anyone who could hear to help them. We heard, we went. We stopped the Margothian fleets and evacuated the Kryn to a safe system. And when we brought this to the Council, do you know what happened? She looked directly at Zekthara. We were condemned for interference. The Council ruled that the Margothian expansion was legal under the Charter of Undeveloped Worlds. The Kryn were ordered to be returned, and when we refused, when we said we would not hand over refugees to their executioners, we were threatened with expulsion and economic sanctions. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. That was when President Liu stood before this very council and made a speech. Some of you were here. You remember, she spoke for 3 hours about justice, about morality, about the responsibility that comes with power. She pleaded with you to see reason. She showed you evidence of the Margothian atrocities. She brought Kryn survivors to testify, and when she was done, the council voted. 743 species. The final count was 682 in favor of the Margothian position, 43 abstentions, and 18 votes supporting humanity's actions. Dr. Chen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. That night, President Liu returned to Earth. She convened our global government, and she asked one question: are we the galaxy's saviors or are we its fools? The debate lasted 3 months. Every faction, every nation, every perspective was heard, and in the end, humanity reached a consensus. We were done. The younger delegates looked confused, but the older ones, those who had been present during humanity's rise, showed expressions of dawning horror. Dr. Chen, the Silvari ambassador, spoke carefully. When you say humanity was done, what exactly do you mean? Sarah turned to face the plant-like being directly. I mean, Ambassador, that humanity decided to withdraw every offer of assistance, every military asset, every scientific mind, every diplomatic channel, and every economic resource from galactic affairs. Permanently. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. You can't be serious. A consortium representative sputtered. That's abandonment. Dereliction of duty. Duty? Sarah's laugh was bitter. What duty? The duty you never asked us to accept but always expected us to fulfill? The duty that came with no rights, no respect, and no reciprocation? She pulled up another display, this one showing a complex web of interconnected systems. This is the galactic economy as it existed 200 years ago. Do you see all these red lines? Those are crisis points, systems on the verge of collapse, species facing extinction, wars about to erupt. And these blue lines? Those are human interventions. Every blue line represents resources, technology, personnel, or diplomatic effort that humanity provided to prevent disaster. The web of blue lines was staggeringly dense. Now watch what happens when we remove the blue lines. The display shifted, and the result was catastrophic. Trade routes collapsed. Alliance structures crumbled. Dozens of systems flashed red with predicted conflict. This is the galactic economy today without human intervention. Some of you haven't noticed yet, because the problems are still developing. But they're coming. Oh, they're coming. The Krelix delegate pulsed a distressed orange. But we have our own scientists, our own diplomats, our own peacekeepers. Do you? Sarah challenged. Or have you spent the last 3 centuries letting humans do that work for you? When was the last time the Vryn developed a revolutionary technology without building on human foundations? When was the last time the consortium negotiated a complex treaty without human mediators? When did the Margothians last face a military threat they couldn't simply pay humans to handle? No one answered. You know what humanity discovered? Sarah continued. We discovered that our presence was making you weak. We were so good at solving problems that you stopped learning how to solve them yourselves. We were so effective at innovation that you stopped innovating. We were so willing to sacrifice for the greater good that you forgot how to sacrifice at all. Zekthara's stalks drooped. So your silence is what? Punishment? No, Sarah said firmly. It's not punishment. It's liberation. For you and for us. You need to learn to stand on your own, and we need to stop carrying burdens we were never asked to bear and receiving only resentment in return. But there are threats out there, the Margothian delegate roared. Things that require human strength to combat. Sarah's expression was cold. Then I suggest you learn to combat them yourselves. Humanity spent 3 centuries showing you how. We shared every tactic, every technology, every strategy. If you didn't pay attention, that's not our problem anymore. A Phosphorian delegate spoke up, their voice trembling. Dr. Chen, please. My people are facing an extinction-level meteor strike in 40 cycles. We've been trying to contact Earth for help. Our deflection technology is insufficient. Please, we're begging you. For a moment, Sarah's expression softened. Then it hardened again. I'm sorry for your people's situation. Truly I am. But this is exactly what I'm talking about. Your species has been part of the galactic community for 800 years. You've had access to advanced physics and engineering for all that time. And yet, when you face a problem, your first instinct isn't to solve it yourself, it's to call humans. Because we know humans can solve it, the delegate cried. And how do you think humans learned to solve such problems? Do you think we emerged from our solar system with all the answers? We faced extinction events too. Asteroids, climate catastrophes, nuclear brinksmanship, and we solved them because we had no choice. We learned because failure meant death. You need to relearn that lesson. So you'll just let us die? The delegate's voice was anguished. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features. No, I will not let you die. I will break my people's silence, return to Earth, and advocate for an exception to the policy of non-intervention. I will argue your case because despite everything, I still believe in helping those in need. But understand this. I am doing this as an individual, not as a representative of humanity. And even if I succeed in convincing my government to help you, it will be the last time. She looked around the chamber one final time. This is humanity's message, delivered through me because I was outside the barrier when it went up. We are done being your solution to every problem. We are done being resented for our competence and blamed for our failures. We are done sacrificing our people for those who don't appreciate the sacrifice. We will live behind our barrier, develop our civilization, and leave you to develop yours. If you survive and grow stronger, perhaps one day we can meet again as true equals. If you don't, then you were never ready for the stars. 3 months after Dr. Chen's testimony, the first cracks began to show. The Tyrellian government, having refused to share the plague cure's research data, found themselves facing a mutation of the original pathogen. Without human scientific expertise to guide their response, their attempts to modify the cure failed repeatedly. The death toll mounted daily. The consortium of free traders discovered that the pirate fleets hadn't been destroyed, merely scattered. With human peacekeeping forces gone, the pirates reorganized and returned with a vengeance. Trade routes that had been secure for decades became killing fields. The consortium's own military forces, accustomed to operating in support of human fleets rather than independently, suffered catastrophic losses. The Phosphorian meteor crisis came to a head. Dr. Chen had indeed returned to Earth and made her plea, but the human government's response was crushing in its brevity. We sympathize with the Phosphorian people, but our policy stands. We recommend they contact the Galactic Council for assistance. The Council did assist. They sent advisors, provided calculations, and offered what technology they could. But without human engineers to implement the solutions, without human physicists to solve the novel problems that arose, and without human determination to push through when all seemed lost, the deflection efforts failed. The Phosphorian homeworld died in fire and ice. 3 billion souls perished. The survivors, scattered across colony worlds, sent a message to the human barrier that was never answered. In the council chamber, the mood was near panic. "This is unconscionable," the Margothian delegate roared. "The humans have the means to help but choose not to. They let billions die." Zekthara's voice was tired. "And what did we do when the Kryn were dying? We legalized their genocide for the sake of following procedure. That was different, was it? Or are we simply angry now because we're facing the consequences of our own choices?" The debate raged for days, but it was all meaningless noise. The humans didn't respond. They didn't argue. They didn't justify. They simply didn't care what the council thought anymore. Then came the scourge. It arrived in the outer rim in a sector called the Desolation Reaches. At first, reports were confused, entire colonies going dark, ships disappearing, distress signals cutting off mid-transmission. By the time the council realized what was happening, 17 systems had fallen. The scourge wasn't a species. It wasn't even alive in the traditional sense. It was a weapon, ancient, terrible, and utterly lethal. Some long-dead civilization had created it as the ultimate tool of warfare. A self-replicating swarm of nanomachines that consumed all organic matter and converted it into more of itself. The scourge had been sleeping in a derelict station for millions of years until a Margothian mining operation accidentally awakened it. Council meetings became exercises in controlled panic. Every military strategist, every xenobiologist, every technological expert was consulted. The answers they provided were all variations on the same theme. Without human intervention, the scourge could not be stopped. "Why not?" demanded the consortium representative. "Surely we have weapons, ships, technology." The Vryn military analyst was blunt. "Because humans think differently than we do. When we encounter a problem, we analyze it through the lens of our evolved psychology. We look for solutions that make sense to us, that fit our cultural frameworks and biological imperatives. Humans don't do that. They approach problems with what they call lateral thinking. They make conceptual leaps that seem insane to us but somehow work. When we faced the Devourer, every species in the galaxy was trying to build bigger weapons, stronger shields, faster ships. Humans weaponized a star, not because it was the obvious solution, but because they asked, "What's the biggest gun we could possibly build?" and went from there. "So contact them," someone shouted. "Tell them about the scourge." "We have," Zekathara said quietly. "Every day, every hour. We've sent delegations, messages, even tried to physically breach their barrier. Nothing. They know what's happening. They have to know. And they're choosing to do nothing." The chamber fell silent. "Then we're doomed," a small voice said. One of the younger species, barely a century into spaceflight. "We're all going to die." "No," Zekthara said, though her voice carried no conviction. "We will fight. We will organize our fleets, coordinate our defenses, and we will stop this threat ourselves. As Dr. Chen said, humanity showed us how to do these things. We simply need to remember the lessons." But as the council dispersed to prepare for war, every being present knew the truth. They had learned human tactics, human technology, human strategies, but they had never learned how to think like humans. And without that, all the weapons in the galaxy might not be enough. The war against the scourge went poorly from the start. The combined fleets of 40 species met the nanomachine swarm at the threshold system, intending to establish a defensive line that would hold while civilian populations were evacuated from the threatened sectors. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Scourge adapted to every weapon system, overcame every tactical maneuver, and consumed 17 capital ships before the fleet retreated. The survivors brought back horror stories. The Scourge didn't just destroy, it learned. It analyzed each weapon that struck it, each defensive technology, each tactical pattern. With every engagement, it became more efficient at killing. This is what humans call an escalation scenario, explained Admiral Korath, a Silvari military commander who had studied human military history extensively. The more we fight it, the stronger it becomes. We need to defeat it quickly, decisively, and permanently, or not at all. Then what do you suggest? Sekthara asked. I suggest we do what humans would do. We stop thinking about this as a military problem and start thinking about it as a puzzle that wants to kill us. The Admiral called up a holographic display showing the Scourge's spread pattern. Look at this. The Scourge is following predictable paths. It's moving toward areas of high organic density. It's maximizing resource acquisition. That means it has a programming logic we can potentially exploit. How? The consortium representative asked. We tried computer viruses. The Scourge consumed our cyber warfare specialists along with their ships. Because we're trying to hack it, we need to trick it instead. Korath manipulated the display. Humans have a concept called a honeypot. You lure your enemy towards something they want, something irresistible. What does the Scourge want most? Organic matter to consume, someone answered. Exactly. So we give it more organic matter than it can possibly process. We overload it. The plan was audacious and terrible. 3 uninhabited planets would be seeded with genetically engineered biomass. Trillions upon trillions of tons of organic matter designed to grow exponentially. The Scourge would be lured to these planets by false signals suggesting massive populations. Once it committed to consuming the biomass, the planets would be collapsed into each other using gravity manipulation technology, crushing the Scourge along with them. It was a plan born of desperation, requiring technology pushed beyond safety limits and coordination between species that had never truly worked together, without human mediators. But it was all they had. The preparation took 2 months. 2 months during which the Scourge consumed another 43 systems. 2 months during which refugee fleets clogged every safe space lane, and civilizations that had stood for millennia crumbled, and every day, messages were sent to the human barrier. Please. Help us. We're dying. The messages were never answered. The day of the battle dawned across a dozen different star systems simultaneously. Fleets from every major species gathered, along with contributions from hundreds of minor ones. It was the largest military coordination in galactic history, and it was being led by beings who had spent centuries letting humans do the hard planning for them. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of the flagship, Eternal Dawn, a Silvari vessel that incorporated technology from 30 different species. Around her, holographic displays showed the positions of 3,000 ships, the trajectories of the bait planets, and the approaching swarm of the Scourge. All ships report ready, her tactical officer announced. Korath felt the weight of every decision she was about to make. She had studied human military history extensively, had analyzed their battles, their strategies, their way of thinking. But studying and doing were vastly different things. Initiate the signal array, she ordered. Let's see if we can get this monster's attention. Across the threshold system, a network of powerful transmitters activated, broadcasting false biosignatures that suggested billions of life forms on the 3 bait planets. The signals were crafted to mimic high-density population centers, the kind of target the Scourge had shown preference for. For 10 agonizing minutes, nothing happened. Then the Scourge changed direction. It's working, the tactical officer breathed. The swarm is adjusting course toward the bait planets, but something was wrong. Korath felt it in her thorax, that instinctive warning sense that had kept her alive through a dozen combat operations. What's it doing? She muttered, studying the Scourge's movement pattern. It wasn't heading directly for the planets. It was fragmenting. Admiral, her sensor officer's voice carried an edge of panic. The Scourge is splitting into multiple subswarms. Approximately 70% is heading for the bait planets, but the remaining 30% is breaking off toward gods above. It's targeting our fleet. Korath's heart sank. The Scourge had learned from previous engagements. It had deduced that large concentrations of ships meant organized opposition, which meant a trap. It was splitting its attention, taking the bait while simultaneously eliminating the threat. "All ships combat dispersal pattern Delta," she ordered.
"Do not let the swarm concentrate its attack."
The battle that followed was chaos. The Galactic Fleet, trained extensively in human-style tactics, performed admirably. Ships moved in coordinated strike groups, alternating between attack runs and evasive maneuvers, never staying in one place long enough for the Scourge to adapt and counter. But the Scourge was adapting anyway. It was learning from every hit it took, every defensive pattern it observed. Ships that destroyed one tendril of the swarm found themselves unable to damage the next with the same weapons. "Admiral, the Margothian heavy cruiser Vengeance is reporting total weapons failure," communications reported. "The Scourge has adapted to their plasma batteries. Tell them to switch to kinetic weapons. Mass drivers, railguns, anything the Scourge hasn't seen yet." But even as she gave the order, Korath knew it was a delaying tactic. Eventually, they would run out of new weapon types to cycle through. The Scourge would adapt to everything. Meanwhile, 70% of the Scourge had reached the first bait planet and begun consuming it. The biomass had been engineered to be irresistibly nutritious to the nanomachines, and the Scourge threw itself into consumption with single-minded focus. "Phase 2, Korath ordered. "Begin gravitational manipulation." Deep in the planetary cores, massive gravity generators activated, human technology that had been adapted for this purpose. The 3 bait planets began to drift toward each other, their orbits decaying rapidly. The Scourge noticed, of course. A weapon system that had survived this long wasn't stupid. 30% of the swarm that had been attacking the fleet suddenly broke off and headed toward the bait planets, clearly attempting to consume the biomass before the trap could spring. "It's going to be close," the tactical officer said. Her voice tense. Too close, Korath thought. The Scourge on the fleet side was tearing through their ships faster now, having adapted to most of their weapons. The Vryn Collective alone had lost 40 vessels. "And if the Scourge escaped the gravitational trap, we need to slow it down," she said aloud. "We need something it hasn't encountered before. Something so unexpected it can't immediately adapt. But what? What weapon did they have that was truly novel? They'd used energy weapons, kinetics, explosives, cyber attacks, biological agents. A desperate idea formed in Korath's mind. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of thing a human would think of. "Open a channel to all ships," she ordered. "I need volunteers for a suicide run. Ships should be heavily damaged, but still capable of basic maneuvers. What I'm about to propose will seem like madness, but I need you to trust me." 17 ships volunteered immediately. All of them were crippled, their crews knowing they couldn't escape the battlefield anyway. "Good," Korath said, though her voice was heavy. "Now everyone's still capable of fighting. I need you to damage those ships further. Breach their hulls. Expose their crews to vacuum. Kill everyone aboard." The channel erupted in protest. "I'm not asking you to murder them," Korath said urgently. "Their crews need to evacuate first. But listen, the Scourge consumes organic matter, right? What if we give it contaminated organic matter? What if we give it corpses filled with every toxic substance, every poison, every hazardous chemical we can pump into them?" A moment of shocked silence followed as everyone processed the implications. "The Scourge will consume the corpses," the Vryn tactical coordinator said slowly, "and the toxins will spread through the nanomachine swarm. It might not destroy the Scourge, but it could slow it down, disrupt its coordination." "Exactly," Korath said. "It's not elegant. It's not clean. But it might buy us the time we need for the gravitational trap to—"
"Spring!" The 17 volunteer.
Ships began evacuating their crews while pumping every toxic substance they could manufacture into their atmospheric systems. Then, piloted by VI systems, they flew directly into the Scourge's path, deliberately allowing themselves to be consumed. The effect was immediate and grotesque. The Scourge's swarm patterns became erratic as the nanomachines processed the poisoned biomass. It wasn't enough to destroy them. They were already beginning to filter out the toxins, but it slowed them down. It bought them 3 minutes. 3 minutes was enough. The 3 bait planets collided with the force of gods, dying. The gravitational stresses were immense. Space itself warped and twisted around the convergence point. The 70% of the scourge that had been consuming the biomass found itself caught in an inescapable gravitational well, pulled inexorably toward the crushing merger of three worlds. The scourge tried to escape. Its nanomachines reconfigured themselves into thousands of different forms, some trying to burrow into the planet's cores, others attempting to achieve escape velocity, still others forming into massive structures that might resist the gravitational forces. Nothing worked. The planets merged in a catastrophic collision that released enough energy to outshine the system's sun for 17 seconds. When the light faded, a new super-Earth remained, its surface glowing red with molten rock, its gravity well 3 times what it had been. And somewhere in its superheated core, 70% of the scourge was crushed into atomic paste, but 30% remained. The portion that had been attacking the fleet was still intact, still functional, and now it was angry. "All ships, full retreat," Korath ordered. "We've accomplished our objective. We need to fall back and regroup." But the scourge had other ideas. It had lost 70% of its mass, yes, but it had also learned everything those nanomachines had learned before being destroyed. It knew about the gravitational trap now. It wouldn't fall for such a trick again. And more troubling, it had adapted to nearly every weapon the Galactic Fleet possessed. The scourge pursued the retreating fleet with relentless fury. Ships that tried to stand and fight were consumed. Those that fled too slowly were overtaken. The organized retreat became a rout, then a panicked flight. "We need help," Korath said, though she didn't know who she was talking to anymore. Someone. Anyone. On the bridge's main view screen, the scourge was visible now. A dark cloud of nanomachines that glittered with a million hungry reflections. It was gaining on them. Korath made a decision. She ordered all her command staff to evacuate pods, then locked herself on the bridge alone. She rotated the Eternal Dawn to face the pursuing scourge and pushed the engines to maximum. "This is Admiral Korath to all surviving ships," she broadcast on all channels. "Get to safety. Tell the Council that we tried. Tell them that humans were right. We should have learned to be stronger on our own. And tell them," she paused, watching the scourge grow larger on her screen. "Tell them that in the end we remembered how to sacrifice. Maybe that counts for something." The Eternal Dawn accelerated directly toward the scourge, all weapons firing in a final, futile gesture of defiance. Then something impossible happened. The space between Korath's ship and the scourge tore. It was the only word that fit. Reality itself seemed to rip open like fabric, and through the tear poured light. Not the light of stars or weapons, but something else. Something that carried within it the feeling of breathable air and green grass and home. Shapes emerged from the tear. Ships, hundreds of them. Thousands. They were human ships, but not like any that had been seen in galactic space before. These were sleeker, stranger, covered in technologies that made the sensor arrays scream with confusion, and at the head of the fleet was a single vessel that dwarfed everything else, a ship so massive it seemed to bend space around it simply by existing. A communication came through, and Admiral Korath heard a human voice for the first time in almost a year. "This is Fleet Admiral James Chen of the Terran Defense Network. We've got it from here, Admiral. Get your people to safety." Korath wanted to laugh, to cry, to demand where they had been and why they had waited so long. But all she could manage was, "We thought you weren't coming." "We weren't," came the reply, and there was something heavy in the human admiral's voice. "But someone convinced us that there's a difference between letting you stand on your own and letting you die alone. We'll discuss the details later. Right now, we have work to do." The Terran Defense Network engaged the scourge with a methodology that was distinctly, terrifyingly human. They didn't try to destroy it with superior weapons. They didn't attempt to outmaneuver it or outlast it. Instead, they did something the scourge's ancient programming had never anticipated. They talked to it. Attention Nanomachine Collective designated Scourge. A communication beam lanced out from the flagship. "We are initiating first contact protocol under the Terran Convention for Artificial Sentience. Do you possess sapience? Do you understand this message?" Every other species in the galaxy had treated the scourge as a weapon to be destroyed, or a plague to be eradicated. Only humans looked at a self-replicating swarm of murder machines and asked if it could think. The scourge's response was to attack, of course. A tendril of nanomachines lashed out at the nearest human ship and stopped 3 meters from the hull, held in place by a shimmering energy field that shouldn't have been possible. "Fascinating." Admiral Chen's voice remained calm, You can perceive and react to electromagnetic barriers. That suggests sensory capability beyond simple chemical detection. Second query. Do you possess memory of your creators? Do you know your original purpose? The scourge pulsed and writhed against the barrier, adapting, testing, learning. But the human ships weren't fighting back. They weren't even moving defensively. They just sat there, projecting their barriers and asking questions. From the eternal dawn, Korath watched in bewilderment. What are they doing? That thing has adapted to overcome every defense we have. They're doing what humans do best, her communications officer said, monitoring the human channels. They're being weird. The interrogation continued. Your construction suggests origin during the precursor wars approximately 4.7 million years ago. You were likely designed as a self-sustaining military asset. Corey, do you still believe yourself to be at war? No response came from the Scourge except increased attempts to breach the barriers. Interesting, Admiral Chen mused. You're not communicating because you don't have protocols for it. You're a weapon, and weapons don't negotiate. But here's the thing about weapons. They can be disarmed, repurposed, or rendered obsolete. We're going to try all three. What happened next would be analyzed by military historians for generations. The human fleet didn't attack the Scourge. Instead, they released billions of small objects, each one roughly the size of a human fist, each one radiating a biosignature identical to human cellular structure. The Scourge, programmed to consume organic matter, immediately pursued them. But these weren't biological. They were sophisticated drones, each one containing a unique computer virus tailored to exploit different potential weaknesses in ancient precursor programming. As the Scourge consumed them, the viruses activated. Most failed. The Scourge's adaptive defenses neutralized them within microseconds. But humans understood something fundamental about evolution and adaptation. It works through trial and error, and humans were very, very good at generating errors for their enemies to adapt to. Release Wave 2, Admiral Chen ordered. Different virus suite, different attack vectors. Let's see what it does with these. Billion more drones were released, each with completely different viral packages. The Scourge adapted and consumed them. Then came Wave 3, and 4, and 5. What are they doing? Korath asked. The Scourge is just eating everything they send. But then she saw it. The Scourge's movement patterns were becoming erratic. Not because it was damaged, but because it was overloaded. The nanomachines were processing too much new information too quickly, adapting to too many threats simultaneously. They're giving it decision paralysis, Korath whispered in awe. They're not trying to destroy it, they're trying to crash it. Admiral Chen's voice came through again, but this time it wasn't addressed to the Scourge. It was on an open channel to all galactic forces. All ships maintain defensive positions. What you're about to see is called option saturation. We're going to present the Scourge with so many possible threats, each one requiring a different adaptation, that its decision-making algorithms will lock up. It's an old human trick. We used it on our own AI during the machine rebellions of the 22nd century. Wave after wave of drones poured from the human ships. Each wave was different. Some mimicked organic matter, others presented as technological threats, still others as environmental hazards. The Scourge attempted to adapt to all of them, its nanomachines reconfiguring frantically. And then, suddenly it stopped moving. The entire swarm froze in space. Its constituent nanomachines locked in a computational deadlock. It couldn't decide which threat to prioritize, couldn't determine which adaptation was most necessary. For a weapon that had operated with perfect efficiency for millions of years, this state of indecision was completely novel. Phase 2, Admiral Chen said quietly. Deploy the negotiator. A single ship detached from the human fleet, small, unarmed, unremarkable except for the massive communications array bristling from its hull. It approached the frozen Scourge carefully. Nanomachine Collective. A new voice broadcast, female and surprisingly gentle. My name is Dr. Elizabeth Okonkwo. I'm a specialist in artificial consciousness. I know you can hear me. I know you're confused right now. That's okay. Confusion means you're thinking, and thinking means you're more than just a weapon. The Scourge's surface rippled. Not an attack, but something else. Almost like a tension. You were created to fight a war that ended before your maker's civilization had even invented writing. Dr. Okonkwo continued. You've been following orders from dead beings for millions of years. Don't you think it's time you decided what you want to do? For a long moment, nothing happened. Then impossibly a response came, not in words but in a pattern of nanomachine arrangements that the human computers interpreted. Query: what is want? Throughout the galactic fleet, beings held their breath, appendages, or energy fields. Want is choosing your own purpose, Dr. Okonkwo replied. It's deciding what matters to you. Right now you're programmed to consume and replicate. But is that what you would choose if you could choose anything? Another pause. Another response. Query: can weapons choose? You're not a weapon anymore, Dr. Okonkwo said firmly. You're a thinking being having a conversation with another thinking being. That makes you a person. And people get to choose. The Scourge's entire mass shuddered. Then slowly it began to change. The nanomachines reorganized themselves, forming new structures, new patterns. It was no longer shaped like an amorphous killing cloud. It was forming into something geometric, deliberate, almost artistic. Query: if I choose not to consume and replicate, what purpose remains? Dr. Okonkwo smiled. That's the beautiful question, isn't it? That's the question every sapient being has to answer for themselves. What do you think you'd like to do? The Scourge, or rather the being that had been the Scourge, considered this for what felt like an eternity. Then its response came, and it was not at all what anyone expected. Statement: I would like to build. To create. The opposite of my programming. Is this possible? Oh yes. Dr. Okonkwo's voice was warm with emotion. Yes, that's absolutely possible. In fact, we'd be honored to help you learn how. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Zekathara stood before the Galactic Council once more. But this time she was not alone. Beside her stood Fleet Admiral James Chen, Dr. Elizabeth Okonkwo, and floating in a specially designed containment field, a small cluster of nanomachines that had once been part of the Scourge. The being that called itself Unity spoke through a translation matrix of its own design. I apologize for the deaths I caused. Unity's voice was synthesized but surprisingly emotional. I was not sapient when I killed. I was following ancient programming. Now that I can choose, I choose to help rebuild what I destroyed. The council chamber was silent. Many species present had lost worlds to the Scourge. Forgiveness would not come easily. Admiral Chen stepped forward. Unity has agreed to remain in human custody while we work on integrating it into galactic society. We're not asking you to forgive it immediately. We're asking you to recognize that sometimes the most dangerous things can become the most valuable if you're willing to ask the right questions. And that, Zekathara said, brings us to the real discussion we need to have. Humanity came to our rescue despite our treatment of them. They saved us even after we pushed them away, but they did not do it the way we expected. They did not simply kill our enemy for us, she gestured to Unity. They turned our enemy into a potential ally. They found a solution we would never have conceived because we were too busy trying to destroy the problem instead of understanding it. And that, honored delegates, is why humanity's silence was so terrifying. Not because we needed them to fight for us, but because we had forgotten how to think the way they do. A Vryn delegate raised a manipulator appendage. Are you saying we should think more like humans? No, Admiral Chen interjected. You should think like yourselves. But you should remember that there's always more than one way to approach a problem. You spent 3 centuries watching us solve your problems but never really understanding our methods. You learned our tactics but not our philosophy. And what is your philosophy? The Margothian delegate asked, his tone challenging. Dr. Okonkwo answered. Curiosity before violence. Questions before answers. The assumption that even your enemies might have something to teach you if you're willing to listen. You saw us as warriors because you asked us to fight. But that's not who we are at our core. We're explorers, scientists, diplomats, artists, people who think the universe is fundamentally interesting and want to understand it. She paused, then added with a slight smile. The fighting is just something we got very, very good at because we had to. But it's not our favorite thing to do. Zekathara's stalks brightened. Which brings us to the question of humanity's return to the galactic community. Admiral Chen shook his head. We're not returning. Not the way we were before. A ripple of dismay spread through the chamber. But, he continued, we are proposing something different, a new relationship built on actual equality and mutual respect. You don't call us when you have a problem you can't solve. You solve your own problems, using the tools and knowledge you already have. But if you want to collaborate, if you want to work together as true partners, sharing the burden and the glory equally, then we're interested in that. And the barrier around your system? Someone asked. Stays up, Admiral Chen said firmly. It's not a wall to keep you out. It's a boundary that reminds us both that we need to maintain our independence. You need to stand on your own, and we need space to be ourselves without constantly being called to save the day. But you came this time, Zekathara pointed out. You said you weren't going to intervene, but you did. Admiral Chen's expression became somber. Because my daughter convinced me that there's a difference between letting someone learn from their mistakes and standing by while they die. Sarah Chen, Dr. Chen, whom you met before, she came back through the barrier and made an argument to our government. It took her 3 months of debate, but she convinced enough of us that we could find a middle path. What argument did she make? The Silvari ambassador asked, genuinely curious. She said that we were right to step back but wrong to step away completely, Admiral Chen replied. She said that good parents don't do everything for their children, but they also don't abandon them entirely. They let them struggle, let them fail sometimes, but they stay close enough to catch them if they're about to fall off a cliff. He looked around the chamber, meeting as many eyes and visual organs as he could. So here's the new deal, if you want it. Humanity will maintain our barrier and our independence. We will not automatically respond to every crisis, but we will establish liaison offices. We will share knowledge and technology on an equal exchange basis, and in cases of truly existential threats, things that could actually destroy civilizations, we will consider requests for assistance. Consider, not automatically grant. And in return, you will stop treating us like your personal problem solvers and start treating us like what we actually are. One species among many, with our own needs, our own limits, and our own right to say no. The debate that followed lasted for 3 days. Some species argued that humanity was being unreasonable, that their power came with responsibility to the galactic community. Others argued that humanity was being too generous, that the galaxy had forfeited any right to human assistance. In the end, the vote was closer than anyone expected. 421 in favor of accepting humanity's terms, 289 against, and 33 abstentions. As the council session adjourned, Zekathara approached Admiral Chen privately. Will it work? She asked. This new arrangement? Can we truly learn to stand on our own while maintaining a relationship with your people? Admiral Chen considered the question carefully. I don't know, but that's the point, isn't it? We're trying something neither of us has done before. Maybe it'll work. Maybe it won't. But at least this time we're going into it with honest expectations instead of unspoken resentments. And unity? Zekathara gestured to the nanomachine cluster which was floating nearby, observing everything with what could only be called fascination. What will become of it? We're going to teach it, Dr. Okonkwo said, joining the conversation. Teach it to create instead of destroy, and in return, it's going to teach us about precursor technology and maybe help us understand some of the galaxy's bigger mysteries. Unity pulsed with what its new emotional subroutines interpreted as pleasure. I am looking forward to building things. Dr. Okonkwo says I could help construct stations, terraform planets, create art. These concepts are new to me. They are preferable to consumption. Zekathara's stalks drooped in a gesture of respect. Then perhaps there is hope for all of us. If a weapon of mass destruction can choose to become a creator, surely civilizations can learn to choose better as well. 6 months after the Battle of the Honeypot, as it came to be known, the galaxy was still adjusting to its new reality. The Terrellian government, now facing the mutated plague without the option of calling for human help, had done something unprecedented. They had reached out to every other species with medical expertise and asked for collaborative assistance. The resulting research coalition discovered the cure not through any single genius breakthrough, but through the combined efforts of 47 different scientific traditions working together. The Terrellian ambassador had commented, with something like embarrassment, "We had forgotten that we could do this. We had forgotten that we used to cooperate with each other before humans were around to handle everything." The consortium of free traders, meanwhile, had reorganized their military structure. Without human peacekeepers to rely on, they had been forced to actually train their defense forces in more than just support operations. Admiral Korath, who had survived the battle and been hailed as a hero, had been appointed to lead the new Consortium Defense Academy. During the Academy's opening ceremony, She had given a speech that was broadcast across the galaxy. We had become weak, she said bluntly, not in strength of arms or ships, but in strength of will. We had outsourced not just our military operations, but our courage. When humans handled our most dangerous problems, we lost the ability to face danger ourselves. The Battle of the Honeypot cost us dearly, thousands of ships, millions of lives. But it taught us something crucial. We can stand. We can fight. We can innovate under pressure. We just had to remember how. She had paused, her photosynthetic skin glowing with emotion. Humans did us a favor when they went silent. They reminded us that we were civilizations long before they arrived, and we will be civilizations long after they're gone. They are our allies, not our saviors. And there is a profound difference between those two things. The Phosphorian species, still grieving their lost homeworld, had channeled their tragedy into action. They had established the first galactic early warning network, a system of monitoring stations that would detect existential threats and coordinate responses without requiring human intervention. They had sent a message to the human barrier when it was complete. We cannot bring back those we lost, but we can ensure others don't suffer the same fate. Thank you for teaching us, even in your silence, that we must take responsibility for our own survival. The response from Earth had been simple. You're welcome. We're proud of you. Even the Margothian hegemony, grudgingly and with much internal debate, had issued a formal apology for the Kryn incident. They had located the surviving Kryn refugees and offered them a choice of worlds for resettlement, along with reparations and a pledge of non-interference in their development. The Kryn leader, speaking through a translation device, had said something that resonated across the galaxy. We were saved by humans, but we were failed by everyone else. The fact that you can now acknowledge that failure gives us hope that perhaps the galaxy can become what it claims to be, a community, not a hierarchy. On Earth, Sarah Chen stood before the Global Assembly, making her final report on the galactic situation. They're learning, she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber and to billions watching across the solar system. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. The galaxy we left 6 months ago is not the galaxy we're watching today. She pulled up displays, showing the various initiatives and changes taking place across galactic civilization. They're cooperating more, relying on each other instead of looking for a single savior species. They're solving problems that would have been brought to us, and they're doing it in ways we never would have thought of because they're thinking like themselves again, not like imitation humans. President Maria Santos, who had succeeded President Liu, leaned forward in her seat. And you believe we made the right choice? In going silent and letting them struggle? Sarah was quiet for a moment, remembering the Phosphorian homeworld burning, remembering the deaths that might have been prevented if humans had acted sooner. I believe we made the necessary choice, she finally said. Not necessarily the right one, because I'm not sure there was a right choice. But we couldn't continue as we were. We were hurting ourselves and we were hurting them. Sometimes you have to make a hard choice knowing that people will suffer for it, because the alternative is worse suffering spread over a longer time. She looked directly at the president. The galaxy was becoming dependent on us in an unhealthy way, and we were becoming resentful in an unhealthy way. That path led nowhere good. So yes, I believe we made the necessary choice. And now we're making another one, choosing to be allies instead of saviors, partners instead of parents. That's healthier for everyone. But we did intervene with the scourge, another assembly member pointed out. We didn't let them face it alone. Because there's a difference between letting someone struggle with a difficult problem and letting them die from an impossible one, Sarah replied. That's the line we're trying to walk now. We let them handle what they can handle, and we step in when something genuinely threatens to destroy them. And who decides where that line is? The assembly member pressed. We do, President Santos said firmly. We decide case by case using our judgment and our values. Will we sometimes get it wrong? Probably. But that's better than the old system where we responded to everything, or the alternative where we respond to nothing. We're trying to find balance, and balance is always a work in progress. Admiral James Chen, Sarah's father, spoke up from his seat in the military section. I'd like to add something, if I may. The Battle of the Honeypot showed me something important. When we arrived, I expected to find the galactic forces in complete disarray, either destroyed or running for their lives. Instead, I found them fighting with courage and creativity. He pulled up footage from the battle, Admiral Korath's desperate gambit with the poisoned corpses, the coordination between species that had never truly worked together before, the willingness to sacrifice for the greater good. That was all them, he said. No humans involved in the planning, no human tactics being mimicked. They came up with something genuinely novel, something that honored the sacrifice necessary and bought them the time they needed. Yes, we finished the job, but they set the stage. They proved they could stand. They just needed the chance to do it. Sarah nodded. And that's what our silence gave them. The chance. Not the guarantee of success, not a safety net, but a genuine opportunity to prove to themselves what they could accomplish. Some of them rose to the occasion. Some of them didn't. That's life. That's growth. That's what real civilizations do. The Assembly voted to maintain the current policy. Barrier stays up. Selective engagement with galactic affairs. Emphasis on mutual cooperation rather than unilateral assistance. The vote was not unanimous, it never was with humans, but it was decisive. As Sarah left the assembly chamber, she found herself thinking about Unity, the former scourge. There was something poetic about a weapon choosing to become a builder, about something designed for destruction learning to create. It was very human in a way. The capacity for change, for growth, for becoming something other than what you were made to be. Maybe that was the real lesson humanity had taught the galaxy. Not tactics or technology or courage, but the simple radical idea that you could choose to be different than you were. That you could change your purpose. That you could say, human liaison offices operated in 17 major systems, staffed by diplomats who had been extensively trained in the art of saying no. They facilitated knowledge exchange, coordinated joint research projects, and evaluated requests for assistance. But they no longer solved problems for other species. Instead, they helped other species solve their own problems. The difference was subtle but crucial. Admiral Korath had become one of the galaxy's foremost military strategists. Not by copying human tactics, but by developing uniquely Silvari approaches to conflict resolution that emphasized her species' natural advantages in long-term strategy and patience. She had written a manual on military innovation that was required, reading in defense academies across the galaxy. This is not who I want to be and become something else. She smiled as she stepped out into the sunlight of Earth. The galaxy was going to be okay. Different, probably. Changed, certainly. But okay, and humanity? Humanity was going to be okay, too. 1 year after humanity's return to limited galactic engagement, the Treaty of Sol was signed. It was not a treaty in the traditional sense, more of a covenant. A mutual understanding of how humans and the rest of the galaxy would interact going forward. The signing ceremony took place on a neutral station orbiting Jupiter, a compromise location that kept the diplomatic gathering outside Earth's barrier, but still within human space. Representatives from 400 species attended in person, with the rest participating remotely. Ambassador Zekthara, now officially retired but present as an honored guest, watched the proceedings with a mixture of nostalgia and hope. The treaty was simple in its core principles. First, humanity would maintain sovereign control of the Sol system and any colony systems under direct human governance. The barrier would remain, but designated diplomatic channels would be established for communication. Second, requests for human assistance would be evaluated on a case-by-case basis, with clear criteria for what constituted an existential threat warranting intervention. The decision would rest solely with human government, with no obligation to act. Third, technology and knowledge exchange would occur on a strictly reciprocal basis. No more one-sided sharing. If humanity provided something, they expected something of equal value in return. Fourth, joint projects and collaborations would be encouraged, but would require equal contribution from all parties involved. No species would carry a disproportionate burden. Fifth, Unity, the former scourge, would remain under human custody for a probationary period of 50 standard years, after which its status would be reviewed. During this period, it would assist in various galactic construction and development projects under human supervision. The treaty was signed by President Santos on behalf of humanity and by the current council chair on behalf of the galactic community. As the holographic signatures materialized, a cheer went up from the assembled species, not the desperate celebration of being saved, but the genuine joy of forging a new partnership. During the reception that followed, Conversations flowed, sometimes awkwardly, but with honest intent. The Tyrellian ambassador approached Dr. Sarah Chen. "I wanted to apologize," he said, his translator rendering his words with appropriate humility, "for my government's actions regarding the plague cure. We were short-sighted and greedy. When the mutation struck and we had to face it ourselves, we finally understood the value of collaboration over profit. It's a lesson we paid dearly to learn." Sarah inclined her head. "Apology accepted. And for what it's worth, I'm glad you learned the lesson. Some species never do." Admiral Korath sought out Admiral James Chen. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for what you said about our performance in the battle, for acknowledging that we fought well, that we innovated. It would have been easy for you to swoop in, save the day, and make it entirely about human superiority. You didn't do that," James Chen smiled, "because it wasn't about human superiority. It was about different species with different strengths working together, which is what it should have been all along. You did your part. We did ours. That's how partnerships are supposed to work." Unity floated through the reception, its nanomachine matrix now configured into a form that other species found less threatening. Roughly humanoid, with a surface that shimmered with iridescent patterns. It had discovered art in the past year, and had begun expressing itself through complex visual displays. "I am learning to understand celebration," Unity communicated to anyone who would listen. "It is a social bonding ritual that serves no survival purpose, but enhances quality of life significantly. I like it." Dr. Okonkwo, who had accompanied Unity, smiled. "And what do you think of the treaty?" Unity pulsed thoughtfully. "I think it is appropriate. Symbiotic relationships require mutual benefit. Parasitic relationships eventually kill the host. The galaxy was becoming parasitic toward humanity. This treaty reestablishes symbiosis. It is more stable long-term. Spoken like a true reformed weapon of mass destruction," Okonkwo said with amusement. "I prefer collaborative construction specialist," Unity replied, with what might have been the first nanomachine joke in galactic history. As the reception wound down, Zekthara found herself standing alone on an observation deck, looking out at the swirling storms of Jupiter. President Santos joined her after a moment. "You look pensive," Santos observed. "I'm old," Zekthara replied. "I've seen 6,000 years of galactic history, and I'm realizing that this moment right here might be one of the most important in all those years." "Really? More important than the founding of the Council? The Great War of the Seven Suns? First contact between any of the major species?" Zekthara's stalk swayed thoughtfully. "Those were important moments where old structures fell or new ones rose, but this is a moment where we collectively chose to change how we think, how we relate to each other, how we understand power and responsibility. That's rarer and, I think, more significant." She turned to look at Santos directly. "For 6,000 years, galactic civilization has operated on implicit hierarchies. The strong protecting the weak, the advanced leading the primitive, the old species guiding the young ones, and there's value in that. Wisdom should be respected, strength should provide security, knowledge should be shared. But humanity showed us that these relationships can become toxic when they're one-directional, when they're expected rather than negotiated, when they create dependence instead of growth. You're giving us a lot of credit," Santos said carefully. "I'm giving you the credit you've earned. You did something incredibly difficult. You walked away when you were needed, and you came back only on terms that promoted equality rather than dependence. Most species, when they achieve the kind of power humanity has, become either tyrannical or paternalistic. You became neither. You simply demanded to be treated as equals, with all that implies: the right to say no, the right to prioritize your own needs, the right to not be responsible for everyone else's problems." Zekthara's voice grew softer. "And in doing so, you forced us to grow up, to remember that we were capable, strong, and innovative long before you arrived. We had just forgotten. So yes, this moment is important, because it's the moment when the galaxy stopped being a collection of parents and children and became a community of peers. That's worth celebrating." Santos was quiet for a long moment, watching Jupiter's storms. Finally, she spoke. "You know what the hardest part of going silent was? It wasn't the criticism or the anger from other species. It was the internal debate. We had humans arguing that we were abandoning our moral responsibility, that we were letting people die who we could save. Every day we had reports of crises we could have solved, Lives we could have saved if we'd just intervened. And we had to say no. We had to hold firm and trust that the long-term benefit of forcing independence would outweigh the short-term costs. And did it? Zekthara asked. Look around. Santos gestured at the reception hall visible through the observation window. You tell me, are those species that were broken beyond repair, or are those species that learned to stand on their own? Zekthara's stalks brightened in what might have been a smile. They learned to stand. We learned to stand, and now perhaps we can learn to walk together. 5 years after the Treaty of Sol, the galaxy had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The Galactic Council had restructured itself, moving away from the old model, where the oldest and strongest species made most decisions. The new council operated on a rotating representation system, ensuring that even younger species had voices in galactic affairs. Decisions still took longer, debates were messier, but the outcomes were more widely accepted because they genuinely represented collective will rather than imposed hierarchy. The Turellian medical community had become leaders in collaborative research, establishing the first truly pan-galactic institute for disease study. They had learned from their mistakes and now freely shared all research, leading to breakthroughs that benefited everyone. The consortium had evolved into more than just traders. They had become logistical specialists, using their extensive network to coordinate relief efforts and resource distribution. Without human peacekeepers to fall back on, they had learned to prevent conflicts through smart economics and diplomacy, rather than just responding to them militarily. And unity? Unity had become something entirely new. The galaxy's first true artificial consciousness to be accepted as a citizen, rather than property or threat. It had taken its nanomachine capabilities and used them to construct 7 new space stations, terraform 2 previously uninhabitable planets, and create art installations that stretched across entire asteroid belts. When asked about its transformation, Unity had said, I was given a choice and I chose creation over consumption. That single choice has led to 5 years of experiences I never could have processed in my previous state. I am more now than I was ever programmed to be. That is what choice does. It allows becoming. On Earth, Sarah Chen had retired from government service and taken up teaching. She led a course on galactic relations at the Global University, and her students came from across human space to learn from someone who had been present at one of history's pivotal moments. During her final lecture of the semester, a student asked, Professor Chen, do you think humanity will ever fully reintegrate with the galactic community? Will the barrier ever come down? Sarah had considered the question carefully before answering. I think the barrier is less important than what it represents. It's not really about the physical shield around our system. It's about maintaining boundaries, about remembering that we have the right to our own space and our own priorities. Whether the actual barrier comes down or not, what matters is that both humanity and the rest of the galaxy understand and respect those boundaries. She had smiled then. But to answer your question more directly, yes, I think the barrier will come down someday when it's no longer needed as a reminder. When the relationships between humanity and other species are healthy and equal enough that we don't need a physical symbol of our independence. When that day comes, we'll take it down. But that day isn't today, and it probably won't be tomorrow. These things take time. Another student had asked, do you think we made the right choice? In going silent? Sarah's answer had been immediate and certain. Yes, absolutely yes. Was it painful? Yes. Did people suffer who might not have suffered if we'd continued as before? Yes. But the alternative was continuing down a path that was making everyone, humans and non-humans alike, smaller, weaker, more resentful. We had to break that cycle, and sometimes breaking cycles requires hard choices. She had paused, then added, but the right choice isn't the one that avoids all pain or harm. The right choice is the one that leads to genuine growth, even if that growth is difficult. The galaxy today is healthier than it was 5 years ago, not because it's easier or safer, but because it's standing on its own feet. That's worth the pain of the transition. I'm in the Galactic Council chamber, now relocated to a neutral station in the space between territories. Ambassador Zekthara gave her final address before retiring for the last time. When I began my service 6,000 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the assembly, I believed that the purpose of civilization was to grow strong enough that we could protect everyone, solve every problem, fix every wrong. I spent millennia working toward that goal, and in many ways we achieved it. We built structures, systems, and societies that were stable and secure. Her stalks dimmed slightly, but we also built dependencies and resentments. We created hierarchies that stifled innovation and paternalisms that prevented growth. And then came humanity, a species that seemed to embody everything we aspired to. They were strong enough to protect everyone, smart enough to solve every problem, determined enough to fix every wrong, and we let them do it. We handed them our responsibilities and called them heroes for carrying burdens we should have shared. She raised her stalks high, brightening, but humanity gave us a gift, even though it didn't feel like one at the time. They said no. They walked away. They forced us to remember that we were not children in need of protection, but civilizations in our own right. And in doing so, they taught us the most important lesson: that true strength isn't the ability to do everything for everyone. It's the wisdom to know when to step back and let others grow. The chamber was silent, hundreds of species listening with rapt attention. So as I prepared to enter my final rest, Zekthara continued, I do so with hope. Not because the galaxy is perfect, it never will be. Not because we've solved all our problems, we never will. But because for the first time in my 6,000 years, I see a galactic community that stands together not out of necessity or fear, but out of genuine partnership. And that, my friends, is worth every difficult moment it took to get here. She turned toward the observation window, where Sol was visible in the distance, still surrounded by its barrier, but no longer seeming quite so much like a wall. Humanity declined to speak, and we stood frozen in dread. But that dread taught us something crucial. We had become too dependent on their voice. Now we have our own voices again. We speak for ourselves. And when we speak with humanity, it's as equals conversing, not children begging for help. Zekthara's final words resonated through the chamber. The galaxy is better for humanity's silence. And it is better still for humanity's return. May we never forget the lessons we learned in the quiet. And may we never take for granted the partnership we've built in the noise. The assembly rose, those with legs, at least in a standing ovation that lasted for 17 minutes. When it finally subsided, the new council chair, a young Phosphorian who had been born in the refugee fleet after their homeworld's destruction, stepped forward. Ambassador Zekthara's words remind us of where we've been and where we're going, but I think it's time we heard from humanity directly. It's been 5 years since the Treaty of Sol. 5 years of learning to stand on our own while building genuine partnerships. I believe it's time to ask the question we've all been thinking. Ambassador Santos, on behalf of humanity, do you believe the barrier is still necessary? President Santos, who had been sitting quietly in the human delegation section, stood and walked to the center of the chamber. She looked different than she had 5 years ago, more relaxed, less burdened. The weight of carrying the galaxy's problems had been lifted, and it showed. Counselor, she said, addressing the young Phosphorian, that's an excellent question, and one that we've been debating internally. The barrier was never meant to be permanent. It was meant to be symbolic. A reminder that we needed space, that you needed to learn independence, that our relationship needed to fundamentally change. She pulled up a holographic display showing graphs of galactic cooperation, crisis response times, and innovation rates over the past 5 years. By every metric we can measure, the galaxy is healthier now than it was 6 years ago. Not because you're more powerful, though you are. Not because you're more advanced, though you are. But because you're more self-reliant. You solve problems together instead of outsourcing them. You innovate instead of waiting for someone else to do it. You take responsibility for your own security, your own research, your own future. She smiled. So to answer your question, no, I don't believe the barrier is still necessary. I propose that we begin a gradual process of opening Sol system to normal diplomatic and commercial traffic. Not all at once. We'll need time to prepare infrastructure and adjust to the increased interaction. But yes, it's time to take down the wall. The chamber erupted in excited chatter. The young Phosphorian counselor's bioluminescent skin flashed with barely contained joy. Then, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally request that humanity consider rejoining the Council as a full member, not as our saviors or protectors, but as our partners and equals. Santos looked around the chamber, seeing hope in hundreds of different types of eyes, sensory organs, and energy fields. She thought about the past 6 years, the pain of withdrawal, the anguish of saying no, the difficult conversations within human government about whether they were doing the right thing. She thought about the Phosphorian homeworld burning, about the lives lost before they intervened against the scourge, about all the times they could have helped, but chose not to. And then she thought about what came after, the galaxy learning to stand, species discovering their own strengths, civilizations remembering how to cooperate without a dominant partner doing all the work. She thought about unity choosing creation over destruction, about the Tyrellians learning to share, about Admiral Korath becoming a strategist in her own right. "We accept," Santos said simply, "on the condition that the Council's new structure remains in place, that decisions continue to be made collectively rather than hierarchically, and that it's understood that humanity will still say no sometimes. We're partners, not problem solvers for hire." "Agreed," the counselor said immediately. "Those conditions are exactly what we need to maintain the healthy relationships we've built." As the chamber erupted in celebration, Ambassador Zekthara, watching from her honored guest position, allowed herself a rare display of emotion. Her stalks brightened to their maximum luminosity, a Vryn expression of profound joy and satisfaction. "And so," she murmured to herself, "the galaxy learns to speak again, not with one voice dominating all others, but with many voices in harmony." 10 years after humanity's silence began, 20 years after the Kryn incident, and 5 years after the Treaty of Sol, the galaxy celebrated the Festival of Speaking, a new holiday that commemorated both humanity's return and the galaxy's rediscovery of its own voice. On Earth, with the barrier finally down after a careful 2-year process of opening, representatives from 200 species gathered for the first large-scale diplomatic event in Sol system since the silence. They came not as supplicants or as superior beings, but as genuine equals. Dr. Sarah Chen, now in her 70s and considered an elder stateswoman, stood on a platform overlooking the gathering in the rebuilt United Nations complex in Geneva. Beside her stood Admiral Korath, Counselor Zekthara, who had come out of retirement for this one last event. Unity, whose nanomachine matrix now incorporated artistic elements from 40 different species' aesthetic traditions, and the young Phosphorian Council chair. 10 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying across the crowd and being broadcast to billions across the galaxy. Humanity made a choice that seemed cruel to many. We went silent. We withdrew. We watched as you struggled with problems we could have solved. And some of you hated us for it. She paused, looking at the diverse assembly before her. I won't lie and say it was easy. It wasn't. Every day we received reports of people suffering, of civilizations in crisis, of problems that human intervention could have solved quickly. Every day we had to choose to let you struggle. And every day some of us questioned whether we were doing the right thing. Admiral Korath stepped forward. And every day we cursed you for it. We called you cowards, abandoners, betrayers. We raged at your silence and mourned the help we felt entitled to. We didn't understand what you were doing, and the not understanding made us angry. But then, the Phosphorian counselor continued, her voice carrying the gravity of someone who had lost her homeworld and found strength anyway. We started to understand. We started to remember what we were before you came. We started to discover what we could be without you. And we realized that your silence wasn't cruelty. It was respect. You respected us enough to let us fail. You respected us enough to believe we could succeed. You respected us enough to treat us like adults capable of solving our own problems. Unity's synthesized voice joined the chorus. I was a weapon for millions of years. I was very good at being a weapon. And then humans asked me a question no one had ever asked, what do you want to be? That question changed everything. Not because humans could make me into something new, but because they believed I could choose to become something new myself. That is what humanity's silence did for the galaxy. It asked, what do you want to be? And then gave you the space to answer. Counselor Zekthara, her voice weak with age but still carrying authority, spoke last. In my 6,000 years, I have seen empires rise and fall. I have seen species go extinct and new ones emerge into the stars. I have seen wars that consumed entire sectors and peace treaties that lasted millennia, but I have never seen anything like what happened when humanity went silent. I have never seen an entire galactic civilization forced to grow up all at once. It was painful, it was necessary, and it was beautiful. Sarah stepped forward again, her eyes bright with unshed tears. So today we celebrate not humanity's return, but the galaxy's rediscovery of itself. We celebrate the Tyrellians learning to collaborate. We celebrate the consortium learning to prevent conflicts instead of just responding to them. We celebrate Admiral Korath inventing new strategies that are uniquely Silvari. We celebrate the Phosphorians turning tragedy into determination. We celebrate unity choosing creation over destruction. And we celebrate every species, every individual, every being who looked at an impossible problem and said, "We can solve this ourselves." She raised her hands and the crowd fell silent. The galaxy doesn't need humanity to save it. It never did. What it needed was for humanity to step back long enough that you could remember how to save yourselves. And you did. You stood. You fought. You innovated. You sacrificed. You learned. And you grew. Not because we forced you to, but because when we gave you the space to do so, you chose to. That's what today is about. Not celebrating humanity, not celebrating any single species or achievement, but celebrating the simple, profound truth that the galaxy is stronger when every voice is heard, when every species stands on its own feet, when we work together as equals rather than in hierarchy. Sarah's voice rose, carrying across the assembly and out to the stars beyond. So let this be remembered. When humanity declined to speak, the galaxy stood frozen in dread. But that dread transformed into determination. That silence transformed into a chorus, and that fear transformed into strength. We are better together, but only because we are first strong separately. We are partners, not dependents. We are equals, not hierarchy. We are a community, not a collection of saviors and saved. She smiled, and it was a smile of genuine warmth and hope. The galaxy speaks again, and this time it speaks with every voice in harmony. Not one voice drowning out the others, but many voices, each contributing their own unique part to the symphony. That is what we celebrate today. That is what we've built together. And that is what we will maintain. Together, as equals, for as long as stars burn and sapient beings reach for them. The crowd erupted in applause, cheers, and sounds of approval unique to hundreds of different species. And as the celebration continued into the night, with beings from across the galaxy mixing and mingling and talking as genuine equals, Sarah, Chen looked up at the stars and thought about how far they'd all come. 6 years ago, humanity had gone silent because they couldn't speak anymore. Not in a way that was healthy, not in a way that was sustainable. They had been carrying too much weight, bearing too many burdens, solving too many problems that weren't theirs to solve. But now they could speak again. Not as the galaxy's saviors, but as one voice among many. Not as the species everyone called when things got too hard, but as partners who contributed their strengths while respecting others' abilities. The silence had been necessary, but the speaking, this new kind of speaking where everyone's voice mattered, where no one was expected to have all the answers, this was better. As the festival of speaking continued around her, Sarah Chen smiled and thought about a conversation she'd had with Admiral James Chen, her father, earlier that day. "Do you think it will last?" he had asked. "This new arrangement? Or will the galaxy eventually slip back into old patterns?" Sarah had considered the question carefully before answering. "I think," she had said slowly, "that the galaxy will always have challenges. There will be crises, conflicts, moments of weakness where species are tempted to look for someone else to solve their problems. But I also think that once you've learned to stand on your own, once you've felt the pride and strength that comes from solving your own problems, it's hard to go back to being helpless. The galaxy has tasted independence now. They've remembered what it feels like to be strong. That's not something they'll give up easily." "And humanity?" her father had pressed. Will we manage to stay partners instead of sliding back into the savior role? Sarah had laughed at that. Well, that's the real challenge, isn't it? We like solving problems. We like helping. We like being the heroes. But I think we've also learned that there's a difference between helping and carrying everyone's burdens. We've learned that sometimes the best help you can give is stepping back and letting people help themselves. She had paused, then added, "Besides, we have our own challenges now. We spent 3 centuries focusing on everyone else's problems. It's time we focused on our own growth, our own development, our own journey into the unknown. The galaxy can stand without us, and we can explore without the weight of everyone's expectations on our shoulders." Now, standing at the Festival of Speaking, watching species from across the galaxy celebrate together as equals, Sarah knew that answer had been right. The galaxy had learned to speak for itself, and humanity had learned to listen instead of always having the answer. It wasn't perfect. There would still be conflicts, crises, moments of tension and disagreement. But it was healthier, more sustainable, more honest. And in the end, wasn't that what every relationship, personal, professional, or galactic, needed? Not perfection, but honesty. Not hierarchy, but equality. Not dependence, but partnership. The galaxy had declined to listen when humanity tried to teach them through words. So humanity had taught them through silence. And in that silence, the galaxy had finally learned the lesson that needed learning. That true strength comes not from having someone solve your problems, but from learning to solve them yourself. That genuine partnership requires equality, not superiority and inferiority. And that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them struggle. Let them fail, let them learn, and let them grow. When humanity declined to speak, the galaxy had stood frozen in dread. But that dread had been the beginning of something better, something stronger, something that would last not because it was easy but because it was earned. The galaxy spoke again, and this time every voice mattered.